I never thought my life would lead me here, a woman in her mid-40s, standing alone in a beautiful house, feeling utterly unseen. My husband was constantly away. What began as business trips, lasting a few days, slowly turned into weeks. And when he did come home, it felt more like a scheduled appearance than a heartfelt return. Our conversations never went beyond the surface. We shared no real connection, and any trace of intimacy had vanished years ago. I kept up the illusion. I cooked. I cleaned. I offered friendly smiles to the neighbors. But inside, I was quietly disappearing. It was early spring when he told me he'd be leaving again, this time for nearly a month. I nodded, feigning understanding like I always did. I didn't object. I never did. This life, as hollow as it felt, had become something I told myself I had accepted. Or at least, I thought I had. Just a week after he left, Aiden, my stepson, came home from college for spring break. 22 years old, tall, kind, and always respectful. I'd been in his life since he was a boy in middle school, and our connection had always been polite, almost distant, like we both understood unspoken boundaries. But this time, something was different. It wasn't inappropriate, not initially, but his gaze held new weight. His compliments, once tossed out casually, began to feel intentional. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning as we stood in the kitchen. His tone was warm, sincere. I laughed, brushing it off, but my chest tightened at the words. We began spending more time together. Coincidentally at first, he offered to help carry groceries, lingered in the kitchen while I cooked, joined me during quiet evenings in front of the TV. I tried to dismiss the subtle shifts, but I wasn't naive. I felt it every time his fingers brushed mine, every moment he stood just slightly closer than necessary. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. He turned to me, his voice soft and steady, and said, "I admire how you've held everything together. You've been strong, for my dad, for all of us." I didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to me like that in years. His words slipped past the emotional armor I had built. And in that moment, I didn't just see my stepson. I saw a man who saw me. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I replayed our conversations again and again. The way he looked at me, the way I hadn't pulled away. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was innocent. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't just loneliness anymore. I had crossed a line in my heart. When I saw him the next morning, his smile made me nervous. There was a warmth in it I found myself aching for. I was beginning to crave that feeling, to be seen, to be wanted, even if it was wrong. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. But I was scared. I hadn't acted on anything. Not yet. But I knew I was nearing a point of no return. And if something didn't change soon, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop what was coming. It happened on a Thursday evening. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses on the skin. I had just finished dinner when a storm rolled in. Heavy rain clattered against the windows, and then the lights cut out, leaving us in flickering candlelight and stillness. The shift in the air was almost immediate. Aiden stepped into the living room, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "I thought you might like this," he said with a gentle smile. I paused for a moment before accepting the glass he offered. The silence between us was soft but heavy, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. As I sipped the wine, I felt myself begin to relax. My defenses slipped little by little, and our conversation meandered, first through shared memories, then into more vulnerable terrain. He opened up in a way he never had before, telling me how disoriented he'd felt lately, how being home gave him a sense of grounding. He said that being around me made him feel safe. His honesty wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't realize I'd needed. But then he said something that made my breath catch. "You don't even see how amazing you are, do you?" I turned to him, confused, but he didn't look away. "You deserve to be seen," he went on, his voice unwavering. "To be with someone who truly makes you feel alive." My heart began to race. I wanted to respond, to shut this down, tell him this was crossing a line. But I didn't. I let the words settle in me, because deep down I had been aching to hear them. For so long, I had felt invisible inside these walls. Forgotten, unnoticed. I admitted that to him, that sometimes I felt like I was slowly disappearing. He reached out and took my hand in his. His touch was soft, careful. I didn't pull away. It didn't feel dangerous. It didn't feel wrong in that moment. It felt natural, as if we had both been drifting toward this, without ever intending to. There was no pressure in his gesture, only sincerity. And for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. His eyes didn't just rest on me. They held me. They filled the hollowness left behind by someone who should have been there, but wasn't. When he leaned in, I should have stopped him. I didn't. Our lips met, gently at first. It was slow, deliberate. A kiss that spoke of unspoken truths, not passion or urgency. A quiet confession from two people who had been carrying too much for too long. When it was over, we didn't speak. The silence was louder than anything we could have said. I stood, murmured something about bed, and left him there on the couch. Sleep never came. My heart wouldn't settle. My thoughts tangled and spun, one crashing into the next. I knew we had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. This wasn't just a kiss. It was a betrayal, not just of my husband, but of the woman I believed I was. And still, part of me didn't feel guilt. Not completely. A part of me felt awakened, like I had finally been touched, felt acknowledged in a way I hadn't in years. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to, but I knew something inside me had shifted, and I'd never be able to go back. The next morning, I moved through the kitchen, as if everything were normal. I avoided his eyes, but normal had vanished. When Aiden entered the room, he was calm, at ease, even. There was a quiet certainty in him, like he had stepped over a line and had no intention of retreating. He offered to help with breakfast. I nodded without meeting his gaze. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged. We didn't speak of the kiss. We didn't need to. It lingered between us, unspoken but undeniable. I tried to tell myself it had been a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. But when his hand brushed against mine again, I didn't flinch. When he stood behind me, reaching for a plate, I felt my body lean ever so slightly toward his. A quiet war stirred inside me, guilt clashing with the thrill of being desired. Later that afternoon, I caught him watching me, not carelessly, but intentionally. His eyes followed me with quiet focus, studying the way I moved, the way I smiled, as if every detail mattered. No one had looked at me like that in years. Not my husband, not anyone. It was wrong. I knew it, and yet I couldn't bring myself to turn away from it. Aiden started staying home more often, skipping plans with friends just to be around me. He made up reasons to spend time together. Movie nights, trips to the store, long walks around the neighborhood. Our conversations grew deeper. He asked me things no one had in a long time, about my childhood, the dreams I once had, the parts of myself I had let go for a marriage that gave nothing in return. That's when I realized just how much of myself I had buried. I told myself I needed to set limits, but the line had already been crossed. I told him we couldn't keep going like this, that what we were doing was reckless, dangerous, bound to end badly. He listened quietly, nodding. He even apologized. But not long after, when we were alone again, he leaned in close and whispered that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I deserved more than being forgotten by a man who couldn't even see the pain on my face when I cried myself to sleep. Each word felt like thread, gently stitching something broken inside me. One night, he brushed his fingers against my cheek and said softly, "You don't have to keep pretending. You're allowed to feel again." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The way I looked at him said everything. Emotionally, the boundaries had already vanished. What happened after that wasn't a choice. It felt inevitable. I barely recognized myself anymore. I was a woman split in two, torn between shame and longing, caught between loyalty and the desperate hunger to be needed. I kept trying to convince myself that I still had control, that I could stop it from going further. But the truth was, I had already fallen. And what scared me more than the guilt was the thought of what would happen when he left again, when his spring break ended and I'd be left standing in this quiet house, alone, hollow, aching. Would he take this version of me, the one that had awakened? When he left, Or would he leave it behind, broken and exposed? As his time at home dwindled, I felt the weight of everything we'd done pressing harder on both of us. I saw it in his stillness, in the way his eyes lingered, but his words grew fewer. Our silence now carried the weight of consequence, not intimacy, but remorse. He began to pack, and with every item he folded, I felt my world crumbling a little more. We had crossed a boundary, yes, but where'd we go from here? We never discussed the future. He made no promises, and I didn't ask for any. I didn't want comforting lies. I had spent too many years wrapped in the illusion of safety with a man who barely remembered I existed. But this was different, messy, intense, wrong but real, and it had to end. The night before he left, he came to me, not bold like before, but hesitant. For the first time, he didn't reach for me. He just looked at me, as though words were trapped somewhere behind his eyes. "I don't regret any of it," he said softly, "but I never wanted to hurt you or ruin your life." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat tightened. I couldn't tell if what I felt was heartbreak or relief. The next morning, I watched him leave. No long goodbye. No promises to return. Just a quiet exit, as if I were a stranger watching someone fade from her life. And then the house fell silent again, colder than it had ever felt. Days later, my husband came back. As usual, he carried gifts, business stories, and plans for his next trip. He sat across from me at dinner, unaware. He didn't see how my eyes avoided his. Didn't notice the quiet weight I now carried. He had no idea that I had given myself emotionally, physically, to someone else, and that it showed, if only to me. At first, I expected to be swallowed by guilt, but instead, I was overcome by sorrow, not just for the act itself, but for the time I had wasted, for the years I had spent trying to feel seen by someone who never truly looked. The betrayal wasn't just in the kiss or the moments we shared. It was in realizing that someone who shouldn't have mattered had seen more of me in a week than my husband had in over a decade. Aiden messaged me once after he left. Just a short text. "Take care of yourself." I stared at it for hours before I finally deleted it. I knew there was no future for what we had, and I also knew there was no return to what I'd had before. Something in me had changed, and it wasn't something I could undo. I was still married, at least on paper, but the bond was empty, hollowed out long before anything ever happened with Aiden. Now I lived beside a man who believed everything was fine, while I bore the weight of choices I could never confess. And maybe that's the real punishment. Not being caught, but having to live with the truth in silence. I learned that love without attention is just routine, and attention without commitment is just temptation. Somewhere between those two, I lost a version of myself I'll never recover.